Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Hello again to everybody, and welcome back to our discussion of the Maha Satipatthana Sutta that we have been pursuing. I hope you're getting as much out of it as I am. I've been really enjoying this discussion. Today we pick up with the second part of discussion of the mind, because last week we started and we looked at the three poisons, and we all had a nice deep discussion on that. And so I kind of split the mind into two parts. That sounds great, doesn't it? Split the mind into two parts. But we split the section of the Satipatthana mind into two parts. So I'm going to pick up where we left off and share this part of the sutta, not that one. There we go. And so last week we talked about this part here that says, mind remains focused on the mind in and of itself. We discern whether it has passion, aversion, or delusion. And we looked at the three poisons. And today we're picking up here with this piece, where we look at some of the other states the mind can be in. So I hope that today is a lively discussion. I'm going to read this. We'll look at these terms, and then I got questions I want to throw at you guys. So let's give this a try. When the mind is restricted, he discerns that the mind is restricted. When the mind is scattered, he discerns that the mind is scattered. When the mind is enlarged, he discerns that the mind is enlarged. When the mind is not enlarged, he discerns that the mind is not enlarged. When the mind is surpassed, he discerns that the mind is surpassed. When the mind is unsurpassed, he discerns that the mind is unsurpassed. When the mind is concentrated, he discerns that the mind is concentrated. When the mind is not concentrated, he discerns that the mind is not concentrated. When the mind is released, he discerns that the mind is released. When the mind is not released, he discerns that the mind is not released. That's a long list of stuff. This passage, as I thought about this week, as I was preparing, I was like, this one I think is one of those Maha Satipatthana Sutta passages that's easy to just glance over. We read this interesting thing about passion and delusion and aversion, and then we read this section, which is kind of a lot of stuff, and then we move on to a reminder that we do this, how we do this. So I think it's easy to go, yeah, okay, concentrated, scattered, but let's take a look at a little deeper dive into what these terms are. I made a little cheat sheet here. Hopefully you can all see this okay. I'll try to zoom in on it a little. Okay. So here, and this list isn't in a perfect order, but let's just look at these one at a time and kind of talk about it, see. And as I bring this up, think about what your experience is with this kind of mind state. So restricted, sankhita. This term refers to a mind that is narrow or confined, often due to being caught up in unwholesome states or defilements. A sankhita mind is one that is not free of or expansive, but instead limited by certain preoccupations or mental hindrances. It can be contrasted with a mind that is vikata, scattered, or as both terms denote a lack of concentration, but Sankhita specifically emphasizes confinement or restriction in scope. So let's think about that one for a minute, just that phrase, a mind that is restricted. So when I think of this one, I think that this mode is probably the average mode that we all run around in daily life, actually, thinking about stuff, worried about stuff. And I think worried fits this. So I wanted to see what you guys thought about that. But when I'm thinking about this particular one, you get something on your mind, like you say it gets into your kitchen and you've got something you're thinking about, and you're thinking about it, can't kind of quite let it go. maybe it's you're really worried about something at work that's going to get you fired or going to cause a problem. And so your mind won't stop thinking about that thing. You wake up in the night thinking about that thing. Or maybe it's something where you're really excited because you're going to go out of town this weekend. So you're at work and instead of working, you're thinking about your trip. And to me, that's what this phrase brings up. Restricted, because my mind is confined to this thing, like whether I like it or not, I'm thinking about this thing, and it does not allow for peace to exist. It doesn't allow for other things to exist, because the tape that's playing in my head is again coming back and back and back and back, and so I'm held to and restricted by that mind. How does everybody feel about that? You have an experience of that? Does that make sense as restricted?
No, never.
Yeah. What do you think about that idea that like this is actually kind of the default mode for like average life?
Yeah, pretty much, I think.
Like always thinking about something.
Yeah.
Right? Like always thinking about something. Like,
I
and
have not
as I,
cloud, but it sounds terrible.
yeah. but even if you think about like you go through your day, you get up, you got your morning stuff that occupies your mind, and you get to work, you do your work thing, your day breezes by, problems come and go, you're thinking about stuff all day, maybe you're in traffic on the way home, maybe you get home and now you got to figure out what to make for dinner. After dinner, what do? You go watch TV or something, right? A lot of people go watch TV. I don't do that a lot these days, but I know there's a time when I used to. And even when you're doing that, watching the news, watching some silly show, whatever is occupying your mind is really restricted by whatever thing it's cooking on right then, isn't it? Like from start to finish. So when I see restricted mind, I see it as a lot of different things, but that essentially it's the restriction of it's confined in a space. Does that make sense to everybody? Let's keep going. We'll talk about some more. Okay. So scattered. This term is used to describe a mind that is distracted, unfocused, or dispersed among many objects. It's the opposite of a concentrated mind, and other ways to translate and understand it might include dispersed, distracted, or disorganized. There's another one that we all experience, I think, and maybe speaks to ADHD mind. Like I'm over here, and I'm over there, and I'm over here, and I'm over there, and I know some like even as we talk about like multitasking, right? Multitasking, a very popular business term, because I can have my mind on all these different things at the same time, but it isn't concentrated. Anybody got anything they want to chime in on that specific term before I keep going?
To me, it seems like there's a lot of overlap with restricted and scattered, because think of the restricted as that is kind of a distraction. If I'm focusing on work when I'm not there yet, like anticipating, that's a distraction. That is a type of distraction.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Oh, Victor, you're muted there, sir. I can see you're talking.
It reminded me of ADHD mind, where say, you're driving and the person next to you says, "Oh, there's a McDonald's, there's a green light, there's the guy next to you, there's a woman waiting on the corner," and you're going, their distracted mind distracts me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's interesting. But yeah, it's again something that ADHD, but we all experience. We all have some level of these. Okay, so enlarged. This refers to a mind that Mahagata. This refers to a mind that has entered into expansive states. It suggests a state of mind that is broad, expansive, or elevated. Alternatives to enlarged might be expanded, elevated, or developed, often associated with the jhanas, which is something we're going to be talking about more in this sutta, or meditative absorptions, deep states of concentration, an enlarged mind. So this is different than the first two, right? The first two, we're looking at things where we go, They feel kind of, we can identify places where they feel edgy, or like scattered or restricted. And we can actually identify places where there's both like pleasurable and non-pleasurable, scattered and restricted. And then you get into these deeper states of concentration that we experience. And you don't have to experience a jhana to experience an enlarged mind, I don't think. I often think of this as in terms of like I'm sitting and I'm thinking about what my mind is doing. And then my mind moves to not just what's happening here, but what's happening in the world, like sounds of the world, boundaries of the world, the people around me, their feelings, not just what's going on here, but what's going on all the way around. That's a more open experience. You may experience this in your practice. You'll be practicing along, things quiet, and you experience kind of a better sense of not just your inner self, but of the entire thing moving around you. Does that make sense to anybody? Yeah. So knowing that these states can exist, and even if it's not something you experience a lot, see, and this is why group discussion's fun, is because we can all agree on what it's like to have your workday mess with your mind. We can all agree what it's like to be worried. And then we say, what about an expanded mind? And these nobles say, oh yeah, expanded mind. And we look and we go, yeah, but I'm not sure, because where is expanded mind in between traffic and work? And so noting for now that those exist, we'll keep going and look at some of the more. So that was enlarged. So we're looking at surpassed. Vimutta is often translated as released or liberated. In the context of being surpassed, it implies a mind that has gone beyond ordinary states, free from the hindrances. It can also be understood as transcended, surpassed, or emancipated. Wow, that sounds pretty great, doesn't it? A surpassed mind. What would that mean? So let's take a look at that as a group. What do you think? Looking for yourself, what would a surpassed mind, what does that mean?
Quite honestly, Pete, I'd like to read it again. Can you go back?
Yeah, let's do that. I like to bounce back and forth between being able to see everybody and translated as released or liberated. In the context of being surpassed, it implies a mind that has gone beyond ordinary states, free from the hindrances, and can also be understood as transcended, surpassed, or emancipated. So let's look at this phrase, beyond ordinary states, and think about that a minute. So we agreed that restricted and scattered can be common ordinary states. Like that's something, not that we don't ever experience a relaxed mind, but that our default mode is often engaged in mental activity. So that might suggest that this is not engaged in mental activity, surpassed of those mental activities. So beyond worry, certainly. So a mind that's free from worry, a mind that's free from the hindrances. And we're going to get into the hindrances next week. I'm going to speak on that again in a minute. The hindrances are the things that make you like sleepiness, sloth and torpor, mental worry. These are some of the things. And it's tough because we haven't gotten into the hindrances yet. That's next. But these things that restrict your mind, worry or sleepiness, or these mental states of scattered. So is there a mind state beyond all those things?
I
Please.
certainly hope so.
Yeah, we can only,
Yeah.
I don't mean to be, yeah, of course.
So when do you experience that? Have you experienced that? Can you point to some time when you felt, Lena, bring it.
Ram Dass retreat.
Yeah.
Among times. We were joking about, me like running off to travel. But the funny thing about that is, I know exactly what you were talking about with the scattered and constricted mind. It like jumps around in unpredictable timings to specific constricted places from one to the other of my concerns. And I find that travel in general, and then going to certain types of retreats in particular, somehow those things, it's really easy to like wipe them away from the mind because I'm not in that specific place where I normally am used to thinking these things. And like, for instance, at the end of the Ram Dass retreat where Pete and I met, I was like, that by the final day, I was like, oh my God, I'm so aware of my heart. It is so open. It feels like there's like nothing between me and other people. Like it's so easy to just literally love them all. And like, I'm like exploding with like joy and like love toward all of my fellow beings. It was like so expanded and like
Yeah.
not, it was like so transcendent. And like, but the entry point to that kind of like, I think, was the whole like, I'm in a different place. So these other things are like in the background now. And then in the foreground, the expanded state like grew.
So it's interesting because you mentioned a few things. First, you noticed the impermanence. You mentioned the shifting change, but also when you talk about that sense of like love, and there's a really good place to go look for some expanded consciousness, because loving kindness, metta, loving kindness is a regular practice we do here. We do it every time when we finish this, and we chant, "May all beings be free from all suffering." Like, feel that. Like, look at that one just a minute. May all beings everywhere be filled with these thoughts of loving kindness. Now, that's an expanded mind. So we can taste that a little bit there. And we kind of compare that to that restricted mind of worry and stuff. Yeah. Nice. Thanks, Alina. Anybody else got a thought on that? I'm going to keep sharing. We're going to look at the last one, which I think is actually out of order because I think this would do better on my list if it was up towards the top. But concentrated, samatha. This refers to a mind that is unified, focused, or composed, typically achieved through practice of concentration meditation. Other translations might include collected, composed, unified, or steady. So we talk a lot about concentration, and concentration is one of the factors of the Eightfold Path. And I'll tell you just one of the most profound things I've experienced in my Buddhist travels. I was talking to a monk from Burma, and he said to me, "Do you know what concentration is?" We'd been sitting there all week, and he goes, "Do you know what concentration is?" He says, "It's one thing." He said, "It's not any other thing. It's just one thing." So it's this thing. It's one thing. It's your mind is solely on your breath. Your mind is not on work and your breath. Your mind isn't even on loving kindness in your breath. Your mind is on your breath. We start there with this practice, concentration on our breath. Is it long? Is it short? And we develop our state of concentration so that we can really look with laser focus. So on the one hand, this belongs on the top of that list because it goes against, it's the opposite of scattered, right? But it also belongs here on the very bottom of the list because it's the state of concentration where you're going to reach these other places, where you're going to reach when you're going to reach deeper states of concentration and expanded mind and so on. So concentration also being maybe the most critical of these to develop, because how else can you pay attention to which one of these mind states you are experiencing, which is the direction? I'm going to share the sutta again. When the mind is restricted, he discerns that the mind is restricted. When the mind is scattered, he discerns that the mind is scattered. When the mind is enlarged, he discerns that the mind is enlarged. When the mind is not enlarged, he discerns that the mind is not enlarged. When the mind is surpassed, he discerns that the mind is surpassed. When the mind is unsurpassed, he discerns that the mind is unsurpassed. When the mind is concentrated, he discerns that the mind is concentrated. When the mind is not concentrated, he discerns that it is not concentrated. When the mind is released, he discerns that the mind is released. When the mind is not released, he discerns that the mind is not released. And again, that released crosses over to what we were reading as liberated. So what's a liberated mind? What is that? So I suppose it's a mind where those other states don't arise. And a lot of times, a lot of times in this stuff, we talk about it as if what we're going to do is cultivate a certain thing and go out there and make this certain thing happen, and then we'll be in a magical state. When the reality is we're kind of untying a knot, and once it's untied, there's no knot there. So it doesn't exist. So when you're in a state of liberation, the poisons that we talked about in the first part of the mind are not something you're engaging with. So those other states don't happen. So a liberated mind would be free, enlarged, open, concentrated. Does that make sense? Now we infer that from this passage. But again, he says, in this way, he remains focused internally and externally on the mind in and of itself, or externally on the mind itself, or both internally and externally on the mind in and of itself, or he remains focused on the phenomena of origination with regard to the mind. Like Alina was saying, these things, these states of mind come and go, of its originating and passing away with regard to the mind, or his mindfulness that there is a mind is maintained to the extent, knowledge, and remembrance, and he remains independent, unsustained, not clinging to anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on the mind in and of itself. So in each one of these sections, as we go, we cap it the same way. And one of the things that we're seeing is he doesn't say necessarily you're not going to experience scattered mind. He says no when you experience scattered mind. He doesn't say you're not going to experience passion. If you're well behaved, you won't experience passion. It's not what he says. He says be conscious when passion is in your mind, right? The recommendation from noting how long and short the breath was, we start there. And one of the observations we made was when you're noting long and short, you're noting not what you think is going to happen, not really what did happen, but what is happening. This breath is long. This breath is short. This inhalation is long. This inhalation is short. In that process, if you hesitate, then your concentration falls apart. You start looking at something else. But you start there and your concentration develops, and then you start to notice some other things, like feelings come and go. And sometimes they're pleasurable, and sometimes they are difficult. And a lot of times they're just vanilla. And we notice that in that space of feelings coming and going, also something that comes and goes is passion for those feelings. I really want those feelings. Oh, I don't want those feelings. And we see that arise. And we see greed arise, and we see the poisons come into play. And then, looking even more deeply, we realize that there's a broader scope of how these things come. That I can have a mind filled with passion, that right now in this time, I'm really excited about something, and so I can't stop thinking about it. And it just nags at me and nags at me and nags at me, or it worries me all the time. I wake up in the night worried about it, thinking about it first thing in the morning. What am I going to do about thus and such? And that time comes and goes. But there it is, a scattered mind. and there's yet another space that that could not be. We can see that. We can see that it comes and goes. We can see that it doesn't belong to us. We can see that we experience it, things float in and out. And we can also see that with our wisdom, states like enlarged states like meta loving kindness, large open mind states exist. And we can perceive that there's a place to where things stop to arise the way that they do. And so there is a unsurpassed spot and a surpassed spot. And all those things coming together, and we're just now getting through the first half of the sutta. So I'm going to open it up to more discussion there. Anybody want to throw some questions out or something? Let's do that, and we'll conclude our discussion on the. This ends this section on the mind, and now next week we'll start digging more deeply into phenomena.
I think for me, it's like making, so just the point being, to note these circumstances, as opposed to making some of those a goal. That's always been kind of a struggle with me since I've been doing this, so it's like, no, this is the point, it's like, it's what you've said over and over and over again, but it's still a struggle,
Yeah, and me too. And like, this has been one of my big questions that I've thrown at teachers, because there seems to be a paradox here. On the one hand, just note that this is happening. Just see it clearly as it's happening. Like, that's the thing. Without attachment, as in it shouldn't go this way or that way, right? So then you say, but we're going to cultivate wisdom and skills here, and we're going to keep those things from happening. So what is it?
Yeah.
And there's references that are quite literally snuff it out. Snuff out the candle of anger. Snuff out the candle of passion. That those things are burning. Put that fire out. So at what point are you standing in the fire? And at what point do you put the fire out? I know. But here's my best estimation. Wisdom develops when you see it. If you walk into the room and you flip on the light switch and nothing happens, what do you gain? Wisdom. The light's not working and you stop doing it, right? So as you see these things and you realize, oh, that's what a scattered mind is like, that scattered mind is unpleasant. It isn't fruitful. It doesn't lead to better states of concentration. Then your tendency to do the things that put you into scattered mind, they dissipate, they go away, and they never happen. So then as that thing doesn't happen, then your load is lightened. You could say it's enlightened a little bit. When you get to that place to where it's like, I realized that letting anger arise in me is not fruitful, so I don't. So I'm not going to get angry in traffic or otherwise. Or I realized that clinging to relationships in this way causes suffering in me and causes suffering in the other. So I'm not going to do it that way. And it doesn't arise. It doesn't happen. So this is the interesting thing, is we have this, I think, idea about Buddhism that it's like, you're going to go train, and if you do enough of these exercises in this way, then you'll just develop a super deluxe energy set or something. But that's actually not what he's saying. And he addresses it, and he addresses it exactly like, I would say one of the most interesting things diving deeply into the sutta is seeing that, yeah, he says your meditation isn't going to be perfect, hardly ever, right? He's not saying that you as practitioners who are walking this way and doing this thing, that what you should expect is that every Saturday morning, you're going to have deep, blissful states of concentration. He says that's not how it shakes out. And so pay attention, because this Saturday you may have been scattered, and next Saturday you might be concentrated, because it comes and goes. And his big thing, which we're going to get to in the last part of the sutta, is the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, where he says, now that you've seen that, now that you'll understand why your suffering is connected to your attachment. why you suffer, where the roots of that suffering are, and what can be done about that stuff. And he says, like at the top, as long as he didn't understand those four things completely clearly, he suffered. But once he understood those four things clearly, he became liberated, unsurpassed, and reached a state where suffering no longer arose. So that's our adventure. Anybody got anything else they'd like to add? I'm talking a lot today. I really wanted to get more group discussion going.
I did like the idea of the restricted mind, kind of, and narrow mind makes a little more sense to me with the clinging, and that's really the narrow mind is differentiated from the concentration, because concentration really is not clinging, the taking in of the breath and noting of the breath. It's just noting.
Yeah.
So,
that's important. That goes right with what Linda was saying, which is that it's like we're talking about just noting it without attachment. Yeah. So concentration allows you to just look clearly, clear eyes.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that, Vicky?
I think I'm still wading through it. I keep kind of coming and going, sort of thing. Because each of the questions that you have brought up, well, then how come, I hear myself saying, well, then, is that state of enlightenment there always? That's kind of contrary to what I'm understanding is always changing.
Nibbana is already here. Nibbana is ever present. It's here right now. Okay. What is it that keeps us from perceiving that? Like, it's already here.
Misperceptions, I think, comes to mind first for me.
Yeah. But I think you all can see it. I think when people slow down and they stop and they just think for a minute, like really look in my heart and in my mind to this space of emptiness. Is it there? Now in Zen, they talk about beginner's mind. You come into the new space and you're not filled with ideas, so you just are seeing. And a lot of Zen is that. A lot of Zen is so it's there, but we're hindered. We're tied up. Next week, we're going to talk about the hindrances. But here's some fun questions I wrote down when I was thinking about this earlier. So I'll throw just a couple questions. So can you identify what triggers your mind to become scattered or concentrated? What are the triggers? I'll just leave you with these questions. Think about this. What do you notice happens before scattered or concentrated?
Feelings, events, kind of outside, things outside me.
Yeah. There are different things.
I think for me, it's feelings of helplessness. All of a sudden, I feel I don't know the answer, or don't know my way forward, or there's a lost feeling. If that makes sense. It'll trigger me off to something not very useful.
So in this practice, we are breathing. So we've got some concentration when that feeling comes. And we see that fear. And we feel it because it's unpleasant. So we note it. It's not a pleasant feeling. And then we can see that if we look at it, that it is just exactly a thought triggering a feeling, and that both thoughts and feelings are impermanent. And so even in the time that we've talked about fear, the fear that you feel when I say the word fear, It's already gone. It comes and goes. And we can see that in ourselves, internally, and we can see that externally. And we aren't sustained by anything in the world. So we don't sustain ourselves off of the worry and fear. We don't sustain ourselves off of the joy and happiness either. We just watch that it's an unfolding thing. That even in this conversation, that sensation of fear that you were experiencing at the top, that we all experienced when we addressed it, is gone. Transient. That's what he's pointing to. And it's true. Whether you're looking at it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, or I'm feeling fully passionate right now, or I'm really angry. Try staying angry, right? Get mad and just stay mad, because it doesn't happen. Even if you wanted to, even if you got a good target to be really mad at, it just gets old. And so he's pointing to this idea, and I better wrap it up for today, but here's the thought I'll leave with, is, so then what's unsurpassed? What's liberated? So liberated mind is beyond those things. Nibbana exists now. My favorite quote on that is actually from the Christian Bible, where Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is nigh. The the ancient translation of that term is already present. The kingdom of heaven is already present. Nibbana is already present. No left, no right. That's enough for today. I'm glad this discussion is going well, and I'm glad to have you guys to help push it forward. This is great. Any other thoughts? We'll stick around and talk some more, but I'm looking at the clock and here we got to get on. Okay. For now, I will share our service presentation stuff that we use to conclude our practice every day. I'm sorry. Bear with me while I try to get this shared. There it is. All right. And please note the enlarged state of your heart and mind when we chant these reflections on universal well-being. May we abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may we maintain well-being in ourselves. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, such acts they will be the heirs. We will conclude with the salutation to the triple gem. Araham sama sambuddho bhagava buddham bhagavantam abhivademi. Swakato bhagavata dhammo dhammam namasami. Supatipanno bhagavato sawaka sangho sangham namami. These discussions are great fun. Thanks for joining.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Pete.